I am a child of the 70s. I grew up in the 70s. And what's interesting about the 70s, and those who were there, remember our biggest communication device was the TV. And this was the way we received content. And for me, as a kid growing up, this is one of the ways I received the majority of my content. But it was all controlled by the television channels. We had 3 of them, and then I think there was a 4th one added in the mid-70s. Now keep in mind, this is what I looked like in the 70s. So the next 5 minutes, take it with a grain of salt. I'm the guy without the beard. But what's interesting about this is I remember vividly the day we got our clicker. Now, for those of you that were there, remember the clicker, the first remote control for TVs. I remember how it sounds, I remember how it feels, but it gave me control over my content. That was amazing to me, because I could sit in my living room and I could flip through these channels and pick what I wanted to see, what I wanted to watch. Now, I was still a slave to the programming schedule, but at least now I had a choice. And that was really amazing. Now, I lived through the birth of VCRs. This was absolutely mind-blowing when you were a kid, that you could either record live TV and watch it when you wanted, or Friday night, you could go to the video store, pick the movie you wanted. You didn't have to wait for it to come on TV 7 months after it closed in the theaters. You could actually go to the video store, pick out what you wanted to watch that day, take it home and watch it. Absolute content control. Now, oftentimes I got to the video store and the video I wanted was out, and that was really sad. Somebody recognized that, and as DVDs came around, Blockbuster said, well, we're going to have 40 of the same title, so we don't run out. And Blockbuster was huge. Remember how they went up everywhere? Before Starbucks, right? Blockbusters were everywhere. But somebody figured out, people don't want to leave their house. They want content delivered. So let's just send it to them. These DVDs are cheap. Let's just make 1 million of them and send them out and they'll mail them back. Brilliant idea. But internet was getting faster and faster, and people realized streaming was the future. Now, it's hard to imagine. I grew up before internet. It's really hard to imagine life without the internet. There's 2 things that happened in the early 2000s that have changed things more dramatically than the internet, in my opinion. First is YouTube. Now, when YouTube first launched in 2005, it was mostly super, super dumb pet videos and kids running into walls and things that were really, really silly. But it's morphed into a huge content distributor. This is replacing everything you know about television and media, because now people are actually contributing content. They're not actually waiting for content to happen. That was huge. And then this happened in 2007, 2 years later. The iPhone happened. And it's not that it was just a really cool device that you could make phone calls and browse the internet. This is a portable TV station. So now you give people access to channels, all of the things on the internet that we use over and over again, the main channels being Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. Now we've given people not only the access to the TV networks, but we've given them control of the content. That's huge. Really, really huge. What does it mean for an orthodontist? A lot. It's changed how we communicate with our patients, and more important, it's changed how we're going to communicate as a profession. And I want you to really take that in as I go through today, because most of the content I'm going to show is digital, and it's shareable, and all of you in the audience are creating it daily. So I want to give you a little background before I get into the guts. 25 years ago, I went to UC San Francisco to do my senior thesis when I was in dental school on the East Coast. And I met this guy, Dr. Baumrin. Dr. Baumrin passed away last year, 94, I think he was. And he was my mentor for 25 years. He taught me about data, and he taught me about organization. This is what our lab looked like 25 years ago. We were just starting to digitize analog x-rays, and we were storing and trying to capture with photographs study models. This was a computer we had. It's a Sun Microsystems computer. It was the biggest computer on the UCSF campus at the time. There was no computer on campus that was bigger that wasn't a mainframe computer. It had 1 gigabyte of memory. Massive. You have 64 times that in your pocket right now, most of you. Upon graduation from UCSF, that's where I did my orthodontic training, I went over the Golden Gate Bridge to a town called Mill Valley, which is just over the bridge about 10 minutes to the north, and started practice. At the same time, my mentor, Dr. Baumrin, was moving to UOP, and I followed him. So I've been on faculty at UOP since 1998. Now, what we're going to talk about mostly today is three-dimensional imaging. Now, the first cone beam machine hit the US in 2001. And this is what we were doing in 2001. You'll notice that that's an Invisalign model superimposed on top of planar films. As soon as the first cone beam images started coming back to our lab, we started building our virtual patient. But notice how we're still thinking planar even in this virtual patient reconstruction. You can see that there's some teeth, but we've got an axial, coronal, sagittal slice. We're still thinking in planes because that's what we're used to. A year later, we had gotten really proficient at Amira, which is basically a 3D Photoshop, and we built this. And my mind was blown. I said, this is the future of orthodontics. I know this is the future of orthodontics. I didn't think it was going to be in my career, but I knew this is where we were going. This took about 2 days to construct in our lab, like full-time work. I said, I'm never going to have it in practice, but this is really impressive. Fast forward 2 more years, and I met this guy, Jack Choi. Jack Choi is the CEO and founder of Anatomage, and this is a software we use in our practice, a software called InVivo. Here he is presenting at a TED Talk, and he's showing a virtual dissection table. And soon after I met Jack, he showed me this, which is an Anatom model, which is basically surface mapping and surface rendering of the 3D cone beam data that we were acquiring. This did not take 2 days to build. He had developed software where we could render the surface maps of all of the teeth and the bones. We could see airway. We had our virtual patient. Inside of 5 to 6 years after cone beam hit. That's fascinating to me. And I knew this was the future, and I knew I was going to see it and I was going to live in it. So I made the investment. At the time, almost $200,000 I dropped on my first iCap machine. It was the scariest day of my practice career. Signing that contract, I think I was shaking. Because I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to use it. I didn't know what I was going to do with my study models. All these things became confusing. As soon as I paid this off, I bought another one. That's how much I love it. These machines are so powerful, and I'm going to share with you today why they are. Now, in 2010, there's a couple folks that are speaking these 2 days, and a couple of them are on this airway task force that was put together by HSO, and they started to tell me about this thing called airway that was hanging out in the back of the throat, and I'm all, that's interesting, great. But when we started looking, we noticed that our patients actually had airways that looked like this. And we didn't know, is that important? Does it matter? Is it correlated? Can we do anything about it? But it put it on the radar. And I'm going to tell you this morning how much this has changed my practice and how much airway-focused orthodontics has changed how I treat people. Now, this is where I live now every day. This is what I look at chairside. I don't look at 2D images anymore. Everything is volume for me because I want to see everything. Now, Dave mentioned yesterday, this is coming to your phone, and it's already here. Anybody that wants to see it, I will show you a 3D model spinning around on my iPhone that I can control. I'll show you this morning after the lecture if you want to see it. That's mind-blowing to me. All this data packed into a phone that I could send to any of you, and you could send to me. Everything in there about that patient. It's no mistake that what Dave mentioned yesterday is reality. Apple put a 3D scanner in a phone. Now, it's just your face right now, but that's right now. And I want you to really challenge yourself to think of the future, the next 10 years, the next 15 years, because your patients will be scanning their teeth with their phone and sending it to you. And that will be your remote connection. This is going to change how we live. So I'm going to share with you 3 things this morning. We're going to talk about how 3D imaging has changed my treatment design, treatment planning, and how we go through every patient. We're going to focus on craftsmanship, because I think it's something as a specialty we cannot lose. We're really talented craftsmen when it comes to teeth, faces, jaws, bites, and we don't want to lose it. And finally, we'll talk about airway-centric orthodontics and total health.